It's been nearly a year since I've covered a Kemco published RPG. Time really flies. Today is my return to covering those titles with another game by the company called Hitpoint, who developed games like Chronos Arc and Bonds of the Sky. With a newer title that looked a bit different than Kemco's usual RPGs, I decided to trek through it. So let's dive right in. Here is my review for Gale of Windoria for the Nintendo Switch. This game takes place in a world with 4 major tribes, each protected by a magical tetra quartz of the elements fire, water, wind, and earth. You play as Shan, a young boy from Windoria. When the wind quartz loses its power and the kingdom is attacked by monsters, he must rescue his childhood friend from becoming a live sacrifice and travel the world to fix what's wrong with it. Now the story here is actually pretty decent. Unlike most RPGs these companies make, there is a lot of effort put into character development and fleshing out the lore of this game's world. You get a lot of setup for Shan, Weena, and many of the other characters of the game. It isn't just, here's the new town, oh look, these NPCs right here are getting attacked, you'd better rescue them. The game takes its time in building up the playables, especially with Shan and Bethlet. We also shy away from the trope of all of the other playables are girls that all fall in love with the protag. Each one has their own connections with others. It's still a little tropey with the protag, but it's very different from many Kemco games that have come before it. When it comes to gameplay, this is a traditional turn-based RPG set in the old 2D style. As you trek through it, you'll traverse a world map, fight in turn-based combat, and visit many towns and dungeons. Going along with that formula is the very typical main progression of this game. You've got a relatively linear path along an overworld going from town to town with the plot guiding you on a quest. And the game's like this for pretty much the entire game. You do get an airship later on to explore the entire world, along with a really nice fast travel mechanic letting you teleport pretty much anywhere from anywhere. But there isn't much side content you can do outside of finding items here and there for one side quest. But the game does have a few things that these Kemco published RPGs are typically known for. You've got a special currency you occasionally get from battle that you can use with an in-game shop. This lets you play a little RNG game to get random pieces of quartz, one of the game's form of equipment. There are a bunch of different rarities and what you get is random. You can get an amazing new skill or simply training quartz that gives you pretty much nothing. And we've also got purchasable DLC for in-game boosters like no random encounters or experience and damage multipliers. So if you want to speed things along in the late game, you can drop $5 to get more XP or damage out of your characters. And speaking of speeding things along, let's get into the combat system. We have turn-based battles with each character having normal attacks and skills they can use, though the game doesn't have battle items like potions and elixirs. It's more reliant on the skill point system where you regenerate SP during battle and support everybody through abilities rather than items. Now the convenient thing here is that your health and SP will reset after every battle. You barely scrape by with a random encounter and when the next one begins you'll be back at full health once again. It makes grinding for levels very useful in the second half of the game, as does the fact that any battle can be modified to have double speed and run on auto. And the auto battle here does deserve some praise for being pretty smart. Most games have auto with just, oh hey everybody's doing physical attacks now. But in this game they're constantly going to be using that SP to buff and debuff party members, heal everybody, and use those big high attack skills. Speaking of, let's talk about those abilities. This game thrives off of customization with the Quartz accessory. These will give stat boosts or new abilities to whatever character has them equipped. Some are elemental skills with buffs and debuffs, while others are healing abilities for keeping everyone alive. You can get them to drop from nearly every enemy of the game with different effects, along with a bunch that are given to you for story events, both required and optional. This is also one of the quote-unquote Kemco flavors of the game. Many of their titles let you combine items to power up others, most often in the form of using weapons to level up your main weapon. But in this game, that's for quartz. Each one can get a better effect up to a certain level and they're upgraded by using other quartz in your inventory to give them experience. And you're going to need to have a good setup. While this game is pretty easy for the first 4 or 5 hours, once you hit the halfway point, boss fights will immediately spike up in difficulty and there will be a lot more emphasis on doing the right things rather than just throwing out skills or using auto battle. And the further you go, the more you're going to need to grind and prepare. You don't really need to grind that much, at least not until the very end of the game, but it's one of the more challenging Kemco RPGs I've played once that second half hits. I personally did a ton of grinding right there at the end of the game, and I still barely managed to scrape through the final boss with the damage ×2 booster at level 90. We also should talk about one aspect of the game that isn't super great. Gale of Windoria has a very high encounter rate. Now, we aren't talking random battles for every step you take, like the Final Fantasy I Game Boy Advance port would do to you in Marsh Cave, but it's pretty high all the same. Now, you will need to do a lot of battles towards the end to get your levels up for the final boss, but it can be a bit off-putting when you're already good enough for the dungeon you're in, and a long room is pushing you back with half a dozen encounters between you and the door. Now, as all of this comes together, we get a pretty good amount of content. I managed to get through the final boss and get my ending after playing for around 18 hours. For a hit point RPG, that's really good. More than double the length of Bond of the Skies, and about the same as Chronos Arc, but with the extreme grinding of that game dialed way back. Though it is worth noting that this game doesn't have a post-game to it. We do have New Game Plus where we can carry over stuff like playtime, character levels, and items, but there's no post-game story chapters like some Kemco games are known for. Next up is presentation. The game looks good. It was designed to mimic those old Super Nintendo RPGs and does it pretty well with the intentional pixelation and blur to parts of the models. And performance is good as always, nice and smooth frame rates, short load times, and no issues with drops or crashing. So with that out of the way, let's go into battery life. On the original model, Gale gives us a battery range of 4 hours and 23 up to 5 hours and 6. The Nintendo Switch Lite gets a range of 4 hours and 48 up to 5 hours and 38. The Redboxer V2 2019 model gets a range of 8 hours and 34 up to 9 hours and 43. And the OLED model gets a range of 8 hours and 49 up to 10 hours and 6. In conclusion, Gale of Windoria might be the best Kemco published title on the Switch. While it has no post-game content and a really high encounter rate, it did a lot to flesh out and make its world a lot more than just evil being is destroying the world and it's up to you and your group of girls that all fall in love with you because reasons to stop them. While I wouldn't call it a masterpiece, if you like Kemco RPGs, it's very good. Reviews to Go rates Gale of Windoria for the Nintendo Switch an 8.5 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.